Open Market is sponsored by AdLib, the self-serve DSP solution making advertising easy. What do the world's largest demand-side platforms have in common? They're effective, but they require large annual contracts and spend minimums. With AdLib, growing agencies get a single platform that connects to every top global DSP with no contracts, no spend minimums, and G2's #1 ranked support. That means access to the entire universe of TV, digital out-of-home, audio, display, video, and native without a hassle and with no blind spots. It's incredibly easy to use, plus it can automate most of the work your team spends hours a day doing manually. Get the most powerful media buying technology without the barriers to entry. Check out AdLib at getadlib.com today. Welcome to Open Market, a podcast about founding, building, and growing companies in the advertising industry. I'm Joe Zappa, and I'm joined by Eric Franchi. What's up, Eric?
Hey, Joe. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So, no one thinks that the advertising industry needs another podcast. And generally, there are tons of B2B tech and business podcasts. I think, however, there are no, to my knowledge, advertising podcasts that are specifically about founding, building, and growing companies. So most of them are about the news and analyzing the news. To my knowledge, there are none that are about what goes into founding an ad tech company. How do you grow it? How do you raise funding? How do you hire people? And so those are the kinds of questions we're going to get into.
Let's get to it.
So a few days ago, very relevant to the topic of the pod, I tweeted, if you had to start an ad tech company tomorrow and have a $10 million exit within 3 years, what idea would you run with? And I specifically wanted to optimize for ideas that someone could make happen relatively quickly. So not like first of their kind visionary ideas. I told you about this and you told me, I hate that idea. Why?
I hate this idea for a couple of reasons. Number one, in my day job, I run a venture fund. So, inherently, I am biased towards looking for companies that have the ability to grow to be $100 million revenue businesses, exit for 500 million, exit for $1 billion, right? So, you're talking about an exit for ants. So even though that is, like a $10 million, and we'll get into this $10 million exit, under the right circumstances could be life-changing for almost everyone. It sure runs contrary to how I have to think for my day job. I think that's number one. Number two, I think building a business with the stated goal of exiting within 3 years, I think you're setting yourself up for failure. I mean, businesses are bought. Generally, businesses are not sold. That said, I do think it's possible. That said, I think there's actually some history to this we can get into. So I think it'll also be a fun exercise into how you might do this, how you might reverse engineer it, how you might architect it.
Yeah, exactly. And part of the reason I tweeted this and wanted to talk about it on the pod is that I think there are so many discussions out there about like the $1 billion exit or the, founding a unicorn and all that stuff. But like for your average Joe, like me and most of the people listening to this pod, like they would be thrilled to start a company and sell it for $10 million or walk away with $10 million. So I wanted to touch on that specifically. So like, let's get into that and let's think about if you were reverse engineering. We could also define what we mean by $10 million exit, because there's a difference, obviously, between selling for 10 million or let's say you have two co-founders and them each walking away with, about $10 million. So
yeah, a $10 million exit, full stop. Mm-hmm. So you build a company, maybe it's just you as sole founder, maybe you have co-founders. Well, for this example, let's do, kind of two co-founders, the canonical example. And our goal is to build something that, has enough of the right components that it gets acquired for $10 million.
Okay, great. I like that clarity. So reverse engineering from there. Like I run a service business, right? Infamously difficult to sell, not great multiples, yada, yada. What are you looking at in ad tech for like a small company that's looking to sell for $10 million? Like, what are you probably looking at in terms of revenue and the kind of multiples you would get at that scale? I realize it's like there are 10 factors and it's all very varied and so on, but give me a sense of what someone would have to build to have that kind of exit.
So asking about revenue, asking about multiples, that for this type of scenario, that's not the right question. Because, let's assume we do this and we'll walk through, what it takes. We're looking at an exit to a strategic acquirer. likely another ad tech company that, you're
Hmm.
building some interesting piece of technology that can be part of a much broader solution. So based on that, and if we're selling to, a strategic that's not a, sort of kind of up and comer, they might be doing $100 million in revenue. They might be doing $1 billion in revenue. When they're looking for acquisitions that, matter when it comes to valuation and multiples, you're just talking about much larger businesses. You're talking about
Hmm.
businesses that have scaled EBITDA, right? Where you can, start to assign a multiple to. In this scenario, a $10 million acquisition is really like a product and technology acquisition. There doesn't need to be even any revenue at all, or maybe
Hmm.
minimal revenue with the proof points that, hey, there's a market for this kind of thing. So if we're going to reverse engineer this scenario, we're not going to be optimizing for revenue at all. We're going to be optimizing for different things.
Right. So, what are we optimizing for? And maybe this is a good time to mention that you were actually involved in an acquisition like this, not you selling your company, but rather when you were still running Undertone, which you co-founded and ultimately sold for $180 million. You bought a mobile ad creative startup called SparkFlow for my understanding is about 20 million, maybe a little less. What did that deal look like?
So, and this I think will lead into, what are the characteristics of this type of scenario. So, Undertone 2014, we had just, sort of completed a pivot from being like an ad network that, traded on standardized display and video inventory to one that was very focused on, unique high impact ad formats. How we built those formats for customers and how we delivered them for customers was super time intensive, labor intensive, and costly. We had people that were literally like building ads. And then we worked with any manner of like rich media firms to, assemble them into components and then deploy them. So the thought was, hey, if we could acquire this capability or build, but that's the decision, build or buy, and we'll talk about this later on. If we can
Hmm.
acquire this capability for the right price, number one, it'll be lower cost over time. Number two, owning the technology will allow us to probably move faster, probably be able to use it in unique ways, like for sales demos, so on and so forth. So the idea was, hey, can we find an asset that would allow us to create and deliver like cool, high impact, rich media ad formats? We looked at the market, and in the market, the players at the time, they were all really big, they were all really expensive. They had expectations of an exit multiple that just didn't make sense for us, given what we were looking to do and really just have a piece of technology. So through our market searching, we found a company called SparkFlow. SparkFlow was a startup at the time. I think, they had less than 10 employees for sure, that had started a year earlier. They were extremely talented. They previously all came out of this company called iBlaster, which was an early rich media company that was ultimately acquired into what became Seismic, which now, sort of sits somewhere in the Amazon or maybe Flash Talking tech stack. They knew how to build product, and they nailed timing because they realized that all of the existing solutions circa 2014, circa 2015 were not built for the mobile first era. And we were now in the mobile first era because, a couple of years earlier, everything started to kick off with the smartphone. So this was a team that had extreme domain expertise. They knew how to build a rich media platform. This is a team that, saw a gap in the market, i.e., they, realized that none of the current competitive set had mobile capabilities, and they built a cool product, and they started to get a little bit of traction, and just timing worked out in every way. We at Undertone needed this capability. They realized this was something that ultimately could be part of a larger entity. So they had a successful acquisition. They then had, a extremely successful outcome because Paragon acquired Undertone, 6 months later for the number you talked about earlier. So as much as I don't like this question, as much as I think you can't engineer a company to be sold in 1 to 3 years, I did it on the other side.
Yeah, it's interesting because some of what you're saying is all the standard advice for how do you be a successful entrepreneur, right? Especially in tech, like right team, right thesis, right time. But what I'm wondering is at that level, like when things are still fairly nascent, they had been around for about a year, I think, when you acquired them. How do you put a number on it?
I mean, what you're usually talking about back then, the rule of thumb was, like a certain amount per engineer or technical talent, right? So the formula, and I don't think this applies anymore, used to be like X amount per, product and eng person, because, again, ultimately these are product and technology acquisitions. So sometimes these things are, kind of called acqui-hires, which I don't love, because oftentimes acqui-hire denotes an acquisition that, was not successful for the company, but really it's a team and technology acquisition. So, you try to figure it out, you have your own framework in mind in terms of, the value that this, if successful, will accrue to you as the acquirer. But then it just becomes an art. What are the goals of the founders? How much money did they take on? Do they have control of the company? Like all of these things that ultimately, kind of, I think, weighs into, what the end price is.
Right. So for the founders, if again, sticking with the theme of reverse engineering this outcome, you would be thinking, okay, we're probably going to get acquired for a combination of team and mostly product. So a lot of it comes down to sort of who are the bigger players in the space, the potential strategics? What are they missing? And how do we create something that's valuable enough to them that they're going to want to snatch this up, essentially?
Yep. Yeah. I think that's right. So what does that mean? From a team perspective, you need to be so deep into this space that you need to know the answers to those questions you just asked, right? What are the gaps in the stack of, a lot of the big players in the segment that you're looking to go after? So for, our example here, our prototypical founders or our heroes, they probably are coming out of a large ad tech platform. They probably, kind of have really, really deep product and technology expertise, because they're going to know where the problems are and probably see a number of solutions that, that can be built in short order.
Right. I mean, I think in terms of the ideal founding team, it's probably pretty standard advice in that you would want at least one person who understands the tech super well and understands where the gaps are. So like, for example, if they're coming out of a big SSP or whatever, they're like, well, this is the big thing they were missing or couldn't quite figure out. And so we're going to plug that gap. And then in terms of a commercial person, you would probably want someone who's going to be able to create buzz pretty quickly, because you're not even, if we're reverse engineering this outcome, which I see why you don't like the exercise, because it doesn't make sense for like building a company long term. But it's like, if we really were trying to optimize for like a 3-year or less exit, we wouldn't be so concerned about someone who's going to have the operational experience to go like build a huge team. We'd be more concerned about someone who can drum up buzz for something and help the market see the value very quickly.
Exactly that. I think the shorthand answer to your question, if we've got two founders, we want one that could build and one that could sell. And don't discount this idea of, sell, or I think you probably said it better, like building buzz. Because again, at some point in our young life, we are going to build a product. We're going to get a product out the door. But, thankfully today, with all the tools that we have in place for, building and reaching audiences, you can do a lot as a small company to create a category, to evangelize a category, to position yourselves as the company in that category. And ultimately, you probably have, more strategic acquirers coming to you as a result, because you're able to build awareness in a way that, back in the day in 2014, 2015, you were not able to do.
Yeah, exactly. I think that challenge is actually probably easier navigated than a lot of ad tech people realize, which is to say, if you're starting from scratch and you want to like create that market for your company, especially within ad tech, if your main audience is really getting bigger ad tech companies to acquire you, honestly, it's pretty straightforward if you have interesting things to say and can say them at high volume to get people interested and to at least know who you are. Like nowadays, I am often out there shilling on behalf of Twitter, essentially for ad tech specifically, but that's exactly what I would tell someone. And I have told people this, like a lot of early stage founders come through my door and I'm like, if your audience is other ad tech companies, you should be on Twitter making a lot of noise there, commenting, be the gadfly in Ari Paparo's mentions, because that's how a lot of people in ad tech who have a lot more power and influence than you are going to notice you before they even should, really. And then, maybe then you go on, the Marketecture pod that you host and do the justify your existence segment or something like that. Like this is how influence is built. And certainly if we were trying to have that kind of outcome in a short time frame, we would want to go about creating that buzz. I have a question for you on the team front, which also I think gets into the funding question and whether these hypothetical co-founders would take any funding. So I am ignorant of the engineering resources that you would typically need to stand something like this up. And my guess is that if our founders in this scenario were raising like a friends and family round or something, maybe that's part of what it would go to, is just like having the engineering resources to get like a working product together. Is that true? Why, in this case, would someone raise any funding, and what would that funding usually go to?
So the short answer is yes. I think you're thinking about this correct. So if we think about this as 4 steps, number one, we've got like our dream team of founders. Number two, we're going to build product. We'll get back to that in a second. Number three, we're going to, go to market, build buzz, create a category. Number four, exit, right off into the sunset. Part two is where we should talk about right now. So we need to build a product. We need to, understand what product to build. We need to get it out the door fast. We need to get it, in the hands of customers to, figure out product market fit and start to, kind of work with some partners who ultimately could be partners from a channel perspective or look to be, the strategic acquirer set. We need to do this fast. So to do this fast, we probably want to either, bring on some engineering talent and or have some engineering talent that we can outsource to help just build a product at an accelerated time frame. So figure if we want to get a product out the door in a matter of months, it could cost plus or minus $250,000, $300,000. Just, complete, kind of finger in the air, but there's some, history and thought to that. So what I would do is even if the founders, again, we're reverse engineering an idealized scenario. Even if the founders didn't necessarily need the money, I would go and raise like $500,000 friends and family. I would do it at a very, kind of friends and family attractive valuations or something like $5 million. So founders still own 90% of the business, like vastly disproportionate, ownership in the business, control of the business. But I would raise it very intentionally from people that could be accelerants to it. People that have the relationships that can, help us get to where we want to get to reverse engineer this outcome better and faster and with a higher degree of success. So, do I go to 10, 20 friends, 25, 50K each, have them come into the business, have them realize that, we're looking to move fast and, do something that might not be the $1 billion outcome, but millions of dollars, and bring them along for the ride and seek to get a product out the door in a matter of months.
Yeah, you would want people who can point out like flaws in your thinking and flaws in the product and help on that front, but who also obviously have connections and might introduce you to the right people, because that's kind of the beauty of the idea, is that we're not talking about an idea where you need thousands of people to pay attention. You need like the right, like 24 people to pay attention. So,
Exactly.
Having the right connections is everything in that scenario.
Yeah, exactly. And, hopefully they are people that have, enough, not just knowledge, but influence in the space that they can then be additional amplifiers of all the messaging that you're going to be putting out to create a category, to position yourself as the leader, and ultimately, show the market that this is a real thing that they should pay attention to.
How does this scenario compare to what you generally see with early stage ad tech companies talking to you about raising money? Like what kind of money are they generally raising in the beginning? What are they putting it toward, and so on?
Yeah. So, the 500K friends and family, that's a pretty standard thing. And once in a while, we might put, in a fund, although this is not the rule. Don't come to me, asking for these types of scenarios if you don't know me. Like we might, contribute to this type of round because it's just like, we know the team, we want to be involved, we want to be there from day zero all the way through the duration. So 500K to get a prototype out the door and start to get a little bit of traction typically is the benchmark from, sort of like 0 to 1. From there, you're looking at, like a pre-seed round, which could be like $1 million, $1.5 million, a seed of 3, and then, so on and so forth from there. We don't want to be doing this in our example. We want to own 90% of this business. We want to position ourselves for having at least some optionality of an outcome that allows us to sell this thing for $10 million, have $9 million that, is between the founders and the early team and enjoy a fantastic outcome. But, what we don't want to do is, create the need to be constantly raising, constantly diluting, and needing to go for a much larger outcome, because at the end of the day, we no longer own 90%. We might own, after dilution, 30%, 20%, so on and so forth. And that's why, again, when I say it's like my day job does not permit me to, allow this to enter into my brain, that's what typical $1 billion outcomes, that's how that path is set.
And also there's probably generally like a broadening of the ambitions or the vision. Whereas in this scenario, again, we want to be super targeted. Just what's the gap? What do potential strategic acquirers need? And how can we supply it to them? Apropos of which, I think, so we covered the economics a bit. We covered the team. I think the third element of this discussion is the product / category / thesis. And so there was some interesting discussion on Twitter about this. I think a lot of people gravitated toward AI. And I think this is what you said as well, is that if you had to do this idea, you would be thinking about AI for creative workflow or measurement. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, people should refer to the thread, and hopefully we'll have show notes, and Joe can point to this into the show notes, because there's a lot of good ideas. But two folks that I know, all kind of centered around this idea. So one was Ari, we had an idea around, a lightweight NMM, right, platform. So for measurement, I think it was Michael Bishop said the same thing around creative for AI. So the thought is, existing platforms, they are not built for the, sort of next era, the next epoch, so to speak, where, ads will automatically be created, ads will automatically be deployed programmatically, ads will automatically be optimized using AI and, media mix modeling solutions to help inform where the next incremental dollar should be spent. Like, all of that is right now just completely fragmented and being built in disparate places and not connected to large platforms if you're not, Amazon, Meta, or Google, right? So the idea is, build something that can be lightweight, that can solve for that, early bit of automation, early bit of using AI to really help, modernize a platform. And I think, the three areas that are near term, like the biggest pain points and the most obvious that need to be created or built or acquired to be said better is, creative connected to the ad buying platform. Michael said, within the DSP, I think that's right. That's quite right. All manner of like workflow and operations. And then ultimately the measurement stuff, to me, that's no brainer. And that, I think that is not a $10 million company. That's probably, a $1 billion company as it relates to really, truly understanding how, to properly attribute media buying activity and use it to, plan and ultimately build a, next generation platform.
Yeah, Michael Bishop, who's the co-founder of OpenAds, mentioned generative display / video creative tooling aimed to get bought by a DSP, since that functionality is going to be table stakes in all of them within a short time scale, and some will rather buy than build. So I think that's a perfect example of, you'll have generative content and you'll want to be able to have ads that can keep up with that from a contextual perspective. This will also, I think, just be the sort of next generation of dynamic creative optimization. Like right now, DCO, generally my understanding is it means you have a bunch of different permutations of ad that you can serve, like different headlines, copy, image, whatever. And it's just a matter of switching in the permutation that's going to have the biggest impact on a given audience. Whereas like generative ads would be much more unstructured, I think. And so presumably advertisers will want to do that, and DSPs will want to enable that, and it'll be part of how they add value beyond just being pipes. And you could certainly see how upstart talented engineer could be like, all these technologies, they're sclerotic and they don't account for these newfangled things like AI, and I've figured out how to account for this. And then a DSP that's very large, to your point at the beginning of the episode, might say, yeah, I can throw $10 million at that to just get a team that already understands it and has a good product.
This is where it breaks my brain, if you've got a founder or two founders that, have that level of domain expertise to really know where this thing is going, be so adept to quickly spin up AI tools to solve what I think is going to be like, a real problem, a real pain point for some of the largest platforms. Is this team really going to sell for 10 million? Like, I think of, in my mind, a couple of people that sort of fit this bill, and there's no way that they're not going to go for, $100 million company at minimum. So that's where this whole exercise starts to get a little bit tough for, again, a person that's got, large number of biases to really wrap his head around. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's funny that you say that because I think that's exactly right. And I think that in those two founders that we were talking about, the typical, you have the technical sort of product person, and then you have the commercial person, someone to build, someone to sell. I am, a lowly discourse merchant. I just like create the buzz and like find the market and whatever. Like, I think people like me, especially because they tend to come out of service businesses and like they're used to that kind of ecosystem, the idea of like, oh, well, like, let's engineer this and like get to a $10 million exit, like it's more attractive. Whereas I think, at least until you have that kind of exit, and then the next time you're like, let's build the $1 billion company or whatever. Whereas I think you're exactly right that the product and technical people I know who could do this kind of thing, Michael is a good example, they tend to be more sort of visionary in their disposition. And they're like, the reason they do it is not just like, let's get a favorable exit, which is, of course, attractive to everyone. It's because they have some sort of idea that they really believe in and they want to see it out. And so I think you're exactly right. Like the reason you don't see this very often, or if it happens, it's probably more of like a happy accident than like the plan, is because whatever technical person has this great idea that some DSP is going to want to scoop up, they are generally not the type of person who is like, I want to make $5 million and then get out of here.
That said, I've seen it happen. That said, during like key pivotal times in a company's life, oftentimes it's a little bit later than this, right? It could be when they're gearing up to raise like their formal seed or their formal Series A. They can be out in market. And at this point, they've got a little bit more traction. They've got a little bit more built, and they can receive an offer that, can be a little bit more. They might have, taken on a little bit more money, have a little bit, less ownership in the company, but, 2025 ends up being life-changing for them. And it becomes a really hard decision. And I've seen it happen a couple of times, which makes this game, so interesting and difficult to plan out over the long term because you don't know what's around the corner. But, sort of to bring it back home and summarize, if we were to reverse engineer this, we would want two founders, one who could build, one who could sell, with real domain expertise that sort of understand the gaps in the market. Number two, we would want to raise a little bit of money to allow us to step on the gas, build a product, get it out the door, have an army of people that can help us get into the door we want to get into and ultimately be, kind of evangelists of the message. We want to, very quickly get in market, build a category, evangelize the category, do everything that you advise, your clients and others to do to build buzz, and ultimately have enough ownership, have disproportionately high ownership, such that if a large company comes calling, you've got real attractive optionality in it. And that's the formula.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very well summarized. The only thing I would add is, I'm of course talking about it in this sort of very cynical, pragmatic manner. But I think you could see an argument for it. Like, why do people do it, right? Like, it could be, well, it's going to be life-changing for me. It's going to be life-changing for the founders. And then also maybe that, becoming a part of the trade desk or whatever, hypothetical DSP we're talking about is going to allow us to immediately go to like the top of the market and work with the biggest brands and agencies and have, the biggest possible impact. It's like the Instagram thing, right? Where they say, people are like, oh, you sold for $1 billion and now it's worth whatever. And they're like, but who knows what it would have been worth if we hadn't had the weight of Facebook behind us.
Yeah, no, it's very well said. And, we're building something that is intentionally designed to be a needed feature of a much larger platform, right? So it's not like we're sitting there, when we've got the letter of intent from, insert name of publicly traded ad tech firm in front of us. We're not like, oh my God, like we're trying to build $1 billion company here. Like we're intentionally building a valuable feature. And a valuable feature as part of a larger platform, can, I think be awesome to work on as the next step after we've de-risked a little bit from a liquidity standpoint. And then number two, who knows where it goes in terms of, these founders' careers, whether it's at Big Co, whether it's moving on to their next startup with a lot more experience, a lot more leverage, a lot more contacts. I think it could end up being like a good scenario regardless. I'm not talking myself into investing in these types of companies.
That's what I was about to make fun of you. I was about to be like, so you've talked yourself into my idea, and Eric is now a champion of the $10 million reverse engineered exit.
I love, these types of companies. I think it's super cool to watch them. But, fund mechanics dictate that we got to go for much bigger outcomes.
Right. Well, we should have additional episodes where we talk about how would you, reverse engineer $100 million or $1 billion exit. And that's more of the thinking you're doing day in, day out at Imperium. So we'll get into that. This was a great first episode. I think we should call it there.
Thank you, Joe. Josie. Why do I attract all these Josies in my life?
It's an intergenerational Josie Adtech contingent now.
I think there is. This is awesome. Thank you, man.
Thanks, Eric. Bye.